And who do you say I am? Over 2,000 years later, this question continues to reverberate in the human heart. Some have only given this question a cursory thought. Others have spent years pondering the answer, searching the scriptures, and looking for evidence. This spring, Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry team with researchers and experts who have studied the Shroud of Turin to once again pose Christ's question to you. Who do you say I am?
Today, many students go to college with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed planted in them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. It is the perfect back-to-school gift for recent high school graduates and current college students. Get your copy for them today at patchworkheart.org or by calling 424-704-3278. That's 424-704-3278. The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, presents a podcast for families in crisis.
Hello, and welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. This is Anne DeSantis, Director, joined by our President, Nikki Kelly. And this is our Beatitudes Series for families in crisis. And on this podcast, our topic is, Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. And if this is your first time listening to our podcast, be sure to go and listen to the other ones because we're right in the middle of this Beatitudes series. And you can listen to those if you go to Philly Nonnatus on YouTube and subscribe. Mickey, thank you so much for joining us again.
Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is a great series because, it's geared for you, our listeners, who are families and individuals in crisis. And when we think about crisis, it could be something to do with divorce, separation. Maybe it's a job loss, sickness, a health problem, relationship issues, trauma, anything to do with emotional or psychological traumas as well. So we want to speak to you who are going through some rough times and talk about this topic of blessed are the merciful. And I'm looking at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Part 3, Life in Christ, under Section 1, Man's Vocation in the Spirit. There's a whole section there on the Beatitudes. And I'll read off the Beatitudes just so that all of you who maybe haven't read them in a while or heard them at Mass, is that the first one is, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are you when you are persecuted for the righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. So, Mickey, when we talk about mercy, I know that you've talked a lot about this on your own podcast. And I want to invite people to go to your YouTube channel as well, because you have some really great videos on many of the topics having to do with Sunday Mass, the gospel readings. But you've talked a lot about mercy. And Mickey's YouTube channel, by the way, is the Catholic Philadelphian. So be sure to subscribe there. So what do you think about that one, Mickey? I know these are all great topics, but you've discussed that one before, mercy and what it means to all of us.
Sure, Anne. Yeah, I just think that mercy is something that if there was a fourth virtue that we need an increase in our world today, and that is one of them. We have faith, hope, charity, but I think mercy would be a fourth one. Kind of like, like how they talk, like you read about like the four horsemen in the apocalypse, but these here are like the four virtues that are needed to reclaim our culture. And the reason I say that is because you look at our Holy Father, Pope Francis, he has been speaking about mercy even the moment he became the Pope in the Catholic Church, overseeing more than 2 billion Catholics. And mercy is needed now more than ever. I mean, it's not just like, if you think it's just about forgiving someone, it's not. Rather, it's a little more than that. Yes, you do want to forgive people. And of course, we also have the past about like, if you give someone 7 times out of 70, and then it's a heck of a lot, but you also hear accounts about, the final judgment in the Gospel of Matthew, towards the end of the Gospel of Matthew. And you also hear about many other accounts of mercy as well. But I think the bottom line is mercy. I had a principal that once told me that mercy starts with you. And I honestly think that if we are merciful towards others, we're able to know God's love for us.
Yeah, well said, because mercy is something we should give away, isn't it? I mean, it's not something we keep to ourselves. And it's also not something that's just meant for us, between us and God, which is a good thing too, right? We need mercy from God for our daily living, but we need to give it away, right? And I'm looking at this article, which I'm just going to tell everyone where they can find it. And it's online. It's actually one of Pope Francis' general audience addresses, which was from March 18th of 2020. If you think about it, that was right before or right after the pandemic, really was set in. And I know in Italy at that time, it was really in full force, March 18th of 2020. And this article is entitled, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy." And what the Holy Father said during this homily that he gave, one of the things that he says is that there are two things that cannot be separated, and they're forgiveness granted and forgiveness received. But many people find themselves difficulty and are unable to forgive. Very often the harm suffered is so great that being able to forgive seems to be like scaling a very high mountain, an enormous effort, and one thinks it can't be done. It just can't be done. This fact of the reciprocity of mercy indicates that we need to turn the perspective around. By ourselves, we are not able. It takes the grace of God. We must ask for it. Indeed, if the fifth beatitude promises finding mercy, and in the Lord's Prayer, we ask for the remission of sins, it means that we are essentially debtors and we need to find mercy. And I think that's important. He's talking about forgiveness as well. And not only do we receive forgiveness, but we give it away. And I think it's the same with mercy. And I think that the more we give away mercy to other people, to be honest, I think you receive it even in an even greater way, because it's a gift from God that is meant to be shared. And I think you made a good point, Mickey, when you talked about the Holy Father, because you're right. He came to the United States back in 2015. He came to our own city where we're located in Philadelphia. And the whole theme was about mercy. And it was about family. And if you think about it, that's what we're all about, isn't it? Isn't that what this foundation is all about?
No, and I agree, actually. Mercy is actually one of the cornerstones of our foundation, of course. We want to help people to seek God's healing. And that is something that is that many of our peers are afraid. They're going to think, oh, if I go to confession, like, I'm going to be judged. I can promise you, the person who's afraid to go to confession, when you go in that confessional, you won't be judged. Instead, you will be forgiven. Now, if you do get judged, I suggest you find another priest. That I will tell you, friendly advice. Pope Francis, even if I may add to that as well, and he says that a little bit of mercy makes the whole world less cold and more just. I honestly think he really hits it, like he hits the nail on the head. And I just thought to myself, whew, because let's face it, we do live in our society, which is very cold. It's all about, like, the whole me mentality. And we think less of others. That beggar on the street that needs money or food or whatever. Do we have the time to let's say we're going to head into Starbucks to get a coffee or whatever? Do we take that moment to get an extra one and give it to that person as we're heading back to work or something? Do we have loose change? Are we willing to give it to that homeless beggar that's outside that's soliciting for money?
Yeah. I mean, I think everything that you're saying is so true. And it's the same concept that we were just talking about the reciprocal, right? I mean, we're receiving God's mercy, but you're also giving it away. And that's good example, because there's people like the homeless that not all of us might be walking by every single day of our lives, depending on where you live, right? But there's people that in your family, in your neighborhood, who might just need something like a friendly hello, right? They might just need something like a text message or a call to see how they're doing. And to me, I think that's mercy as well, when you're able to take your personal time, even if it's just a few minutes, and give it away to someone in friendship, not seeking anything in return. And to me, I really think that that's what mercy is also all about. And the same article that I was just reading from, the one that's called Blessed Are the Merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. I forgot to mention that one is from Catholic Culture, the online source. And it goes on to say, and this is the Holy Father speaking, he says that we're all in debt, all of us, to God who's so generous, and to our brothers. Every person knows he's not the father or mother he should be, the husband or wife, the brother or sister. We are all in deficit in life, and we all are in need of mercy. We know that we too have done wrong. There's always something good that is missing that we should have done. And I remember one of the first things that Pope Francis said when he became Pope, and I don't remember the exact context, and Mickey, you might remember this, when they asked him about himself and who he was and his experience, one of the first things he said is that I'm a sinner. So he recognized that in himself. And I think we all are, like he says in the article, we all have a deficit. And when we realize that deficit, we realize that we need to be merciful to others because we're not perfect. And when we think about people like you, our audience who are listening, that are families in crisis, maybe you've gone through some kind of a trauma in your life. And sometimes when you go through a trauma, it's very hard to feel merciful toward other people, because I just know from personal experience that when you go through a challenge, you're looking for receiving that, aren't you? I mean, I know I was when I've gone through things. But I think what the Holy Father is saying to us, and also even in our scriptures, is that even if we can find a small way to give of ourselves when you're going through a trauma, you will be blessed. And I don't, Mickey, if you had anything to say about that, because I know you understand that going through trauma.
Sure. Well, I mean, I have that, in the previous video, so I don't want to really repeat myself with it, but I just want to encourage everyone to visit some of our previous podcast episodes in which I do discuss some past traumas and what have you. So, but I also want to go back to the point you made, and is that when you talked about Pope Francis, that like one of the first thing he admits is that he recognized the fact that, like us, he's a sinner too. And he's far from perfect. And let's face it, many of the saints of the church, many of them were sinners. Look at St. Paul. Look at, there's like a whole list that, we can go on and on about. Look at St. Augustine, for crying out loud. He even admitted in his book, Confessions. And it's still bringing people to the faith to this day. An ancient work by one of the great doctors in the church is still drawing people into the Catholic faith. It's all because of one thing, and that is God's mercy. It is endless. I even dig up a quote from the diary of Saint Faustina. Know, my daughter, that between me and you, there is a bottomless abyss, an abyss which separates the creator from the creature. But this abyss is filled with my mercy. This is from the Divine Mercy of my soul, Saint Faustina, 1576. Now, I think what we understand here is that no matter like all the sins in the world, you just throw into that abyss and you're not going to see it anymore. And there's also one more powerful thing about that. There's an ocean of mercy. You throw all the sins in there, whether it was gossip or cheating or stealing, to some that, they committed sins of the flesh. All those sins, are tossed into that ocean and it's gone. And all you see is that kind of like that ripple when something's like thrown in the water, but you don't see it anymore. That's how endless God's mercy is.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because the divine mercy is really, it's an amazing prayer, but it's really just an amazing theology, really, if you think about it. I remember when I was first introduced to it, I guess it was probably early 2000s. I had never heard of it, believe it or not, but it was a favorite prayer of St. John Paul II. And a friend introduced it to me and explained it to me that it's a prayer that can be prayed at the bedside of a dying person. And then if it's prayed before that person's death, now, of course, they suggest like the 3:00 hour, because that's the hour that Christ died, that mercy, the remission of their sins, not just, of course, going to confession is the remission of our sins, right? But the corporal punishment that sometimes, like the after effect of sin, is also wiped away. That punishment, what do they call that? Forgive me that I'm losing that train of thought, Mickey. You might think of it, but it's the corporal punishment that you can still receive even after having been forgiven through confession is wiped away. And it's an amazing prayer. So if for you who are listening, and if you've never prayed it or you don't know much about it, I just suggest to go online and key that into your Google or find out more about the prayer to the Divine Mercy. And our friends up in Massachusetts at the fathers, I know that one of the priests, of course, is Father Donald Calloway, right? Has written about it, and Father Michael Gately wrote the book about it. So check it out sometime and learn more. But the Diary of Saint Faustina is an amazing resource to read over and to meditate on her life. And I'm looking again at this article just to give you all some more information on mercy from our Holy Father. He says, where does mercy come from? Jesus told us, be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. The more one welcomes the love of the Father, the more one loves. Mercy is not one dimension among others, but rather it is the center of Christian life. There is no Christianity without mercy. If all our Christianity does not lead us to mercy, we have taken the wrong path, because mercy is the only true destination of every spiritual journey. It is one of the most beautiful fruits of charity. I love how that's said. And that's from the Catechism. That's actually from the Catechism number 1829. So, Mickey, let's talk more about divine mercy. I know that it's a favorite prayer of yours.
Well, I first learned that when I was in the 5th grade, actually. And it was actually around this time of the year, actually. It was like, well, liturgically speaking, it was I was learning it for Lent. And we were praying it, I'll say, some like after school assembly. And we actually had a Holy Week. We actually prayed it during the assembly, kind of like a little prayer service or something. Which was like an excuse for me not to be bored to death in a classroom, of course. Many can relate to that. I always pray it whenever I'm outside the abortion facilities. But we wouldn't typically, like, usually on the given Saturdays that I'm out there, it would be like me and a few other guys. We would pray the Angelus, do Divine Mercy, and then we'll go right into the mysteries of the Rosary. But I always find that there's like some power to it, asking God to have mercy on not just you, but the whole world. And let's face it, we do need God's mercy now more than ever. And let's face it, I mean, you look back at the past several years, it hasn't been a walk in the park, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's going to be a fight for all of us. And I don't mean a physical fight, but it's a fight to stay virtuous and stay on track with God, and realizing that, as that article that I just read, it says that it is the destination of every spiritual journey. So we can't really have that deep relationship with God without the mercy. And we were mentioning confession. I really think that confession is the primary place for all of us to receive mercy as Catholics. And you who are suffering right now, who are people, families and individuals who are in crisis. And sometimes when you're in a trauma, it's hard to go to confession because it may feel like what's happened to you is not your fault. And it very well may not be your fault, whatever that is. But we can always find some room inside of our hearts to ask God to forgive us for the parts that we played in whatever happened. And I'm reading from a book right now. It's called The Power of Forgiveness. It's from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And these are meditations from the Holy Father. And one here says, it's called The Open Door. It says that Jesus came to save us by revealing the merciful face of God and drawing us to him with his loving sacrifice. Thus, we must always remember that the sacrament of reconciliation is a true and proper path to holiness. It is the compelling sign that Jesus left to the church, so that the door of the Father's house would always remain open, and thus that men could always return to him. And this is an address to participants at a course organized by the Apostolic Penitentiary on March 29th of 2019. And it's interesting that was said at a penitentiary, because when you think about it, people who have committed crimes, God wants to extend mercy to every person, no matter what they've done. And Mickey, it's good that you mentioned that sometimes owning up to a certain sin might almost seem like a scary thing or just something that you don't want to do. But nothing could be further from the truth, because you're really receiving the love of God back. Isn't it true? I know that for me, when I've been to confession, that's exactly what I feel and what I've experienced.
Yeah, actually, and just thinking about what you just said, I always think of I mean, this is probably a bit. I always think of the time, like as a Star Wars fan, I always think of one analogy I can offer is in the third movie of the final trilogy. Luke senses that he can bring his father back to the good side. He has to try, so to speak. Spoiler alert, he does. But to back up a little bit, is that one thing he has to understand is that he has to face him. Like when the first time he faced him, he did it kind of prematurely. But the second time around, he wanted to extend that saving. I kind of think of it as like when Luke saves his father from the dark side, so to speak, in Star Wars. And as the whole thing progresses, there was that lightsaber duel, and he chopped off like in the previous movie, like Luke's hand was chopped off by Darth Vader, and then Luke does the same thing, in Return of the Jedi, and when the Emperor tempts him to kill him, Luke resists, of course. And then what does his father do? He saves his son by defeating the Emperor. I mean, I honestly think that's like something right there where, like, you were, and of course in the process, Luke was begging, I kind of think of it, he was also begging for mercy as well, from his father, and he did get it. And no one at all is far from God's mercy. Look at, St. Paul. He was a murderer. He murdered, St. Stephen. But along the way to when he was on the road to Damascus, he had a radical conversion that blinded him. And then he wrote these epistles that we hear on, I'll say 90% of the time during the liturgical year. 90% of the letters we hear for the second reading after the responsorial psalm is coming from St. Paul. 90% of the time, of course. You look at St. John Paul the Great. It's funny, we were talking about him in this podcast episode, and he was a messenger of mercy himself. I should also say he was also an apostle of mercy, because he grew up in Poland, and at the time too, it was under communist occupation. Well, first it was the Nazis, and then of course when the Cold War was heating up, no pun intended, of course, the communists were taking over the Soviet bloc, and of course you had the Iron Curtain and everything. And also during those tumultuous years, St. John Paul the Great was losing friends. He lost family members too. And he could have chosen to be bitter, yet he relied on God's mercy. And that's what got him through the ordeal, all life's ordeals. And he was tested too back in May 1981 when someone from the KGB tried to murder him, because they knew that communism was about to fall in Russia. They knew that St. John Paul the Great was Russia's number one enemy, and this guy tried to carry out something. By birth, he was he was from Turkey, and Turkey doesn't like it when you try to kill, a religious figure like the Pope, because that's like an automatic death sentence. But main on point. One of the things that St. John Paul the Great did, it's one thing you preach about these things, but you put it in action, and he did. St. John Paul the Great would go visit his would-be assassin, and he forgave him, and he called him to a life of mercy. You also look at the example of St. Maria Goretti, who was raped and murdered by her attacker. Yet she came to him in his dreams and called Alessandro, who has a cause of canonization at this moment, called him. First of all, she forgave him. Secondly, she appeared to him in dreams and he called him to a life of penance. So you see, no matter how great the sin is, mercy is still in plain sight. All you need to do is keep your eye on it. You have to pursue that mercy. And I say to those of you, I urge you, go to confession. God's mercy is waiting for you. It's not going to come to you. You must go to it. Just as Moses went on Mount Sinai and received the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, thank you. I love how you express that pursue it, because if we don't pursue it, it doesn't just, we have to have that awareness, I think is what I'm trying to say, is that there's a certain awareness of wanting to have God's mercy in your life, wanting to make a difference and wanting to be closer. And that same book that I was referring to with The Power of Forgiveness, it says that mercy triumphs over sin. It says mercy will always be greater than any sin. No one can put a limit on the love of the all-forgiving God. Just by looking at him, just by raising our eyes from ourselves and our wounds, we leave an opening for the action of his grace. Jesus performs miracles with our sins, with what we are, with our nothingness, and with our wretchedness. And that is from a book called The Name of God is Mercy, 2016. So check that book out sometime. Again, this is from the book from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops called The Power of Forgiveness, with a lot of different quotes in it, but namely quotes from the Holy Father and general audiences. And I like the one thing that it says here, that it's an action of his grace. We can never forget that it's a gift, right? It's a gift. And it is that gift that I was saying at the beginning of the podcast that's meant to be given to others. And so if you're that family in crisis, an individual for whatever reason, I mean, it could be a multitude of things, as we talk about in our foundation, that we help people affected by divorce. We help marriages that are in trouble, job loss, relationship issues, sickness, all kinds of things related to crisis. Search inside your heart, because even if you're at a weak point, God is still inviting you to grow, right? Don't you think, Mickey? You're still invited to grow even when you go through challenging times.
I agree for sure. I agree for sure, Anne. I mean, I always tell people, if you trip and fall, get back up and keep moving forward. That's the thing about sin. And if you also remember the first Sunday of Lent, regardless of what year cycle it is, you always hear about the account of when Jesus is tempted in the desert. And 3 times the devil tempted Jesus. Yet the fasting he did for those 40 days prepared him for that very moment in which he triumphed over temptation. He triumphed over Satan. And let's face it, I mean, like, there's a certain, like, you can live about 8 days without food. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'll probably look like one of those, if you remember seeing one of those documentaries on World War II about the Bataan Death March, I'll look like one of those prisoners after being liberated after so many years. So, but I also think too that with the reality is, people are scared, and they shouldn't be anymore, because we have to. Everyone needs to pursue mercy, as we were just saying this moment ago on this podcast. But we encourage you to pursue it. And if you fall down, don't panic. Especially with this podcast, everyone will be listening to this in the midst of their Lent journey, most likely halfway through the journey. And sometimes we have you need this halftime, locker room speech. And here it is. So don't be scared. Don't be afraid. And the worst thing you can do is, if you do get knocked down, you just give up. How often do we see boxers, when they get knocked down during a fight, they let that referee count up to 10 and say, you're done? That's the worst thing you can do on your Christian journey. But the best thing you can do is get up and fight your opponent harder. Now, your opponent, as St. Paul reminds us in Ephesians, is not the flesh and blood, but rather is the principalities of this world. But we must overcome them in order to be into the next world.
Yes, totally correct and spot on, because we need to look at this from the bird's eye view and not just close up and what you're going through right now. And realizing, I think, that life is long. I remember a friend of mine said that to me one time. It really stuck with me. And I think what she was trying to say is that God is so merciful that he gives us, some of us, not all of us, but for the most part, people who do live to a certain age, we get time. We do get time to be able to make things right. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it sooner than later, right? We shouldn't. Now is the time, right? Now is the time for us to grow closer to God and to accept his mercy. And I keep referring to you, our audience, because you're the people why we're here and why we do what we do. Why do we do these podcasts every month about this topic? And that's because we're there for you. We care about you. And as I always say, the church cares, and so does the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation. I'm looking also at a book here. This one is 365 Daily Meditations with Pope Francis. And under Ministers of Mercy, it says that, how are we treating the people of God? I dream of a church that is a mother of shepherdness. The church ministers must be merciful, take responsibility for the people, and accompany them like the Good Samaritan, who washes, cleans, and raises up his neighbor. This is pure gospel. God is greater than sin. I like this quote because it doesn't just talk about us and our sin and getting mercy from God just for us. It talks of us being ministers of mercy. And I know, Mickey, you've addressed that on other things that you've done, perhaps your YouTube channel or just other videos that you've done, and use that term, ministers of mercy, because that's what we are. You know, when we can forgive somebody for something that was done to us, and really a heartfelt forgiveness, we're being a minister of mercy. And even better than that, if there's a way that we can communicate that to someone else, maybe even to the person that you need to forgive or that I need to forgive, or maybe we need to go to someone and say we're sorry for something. I do think that that makes a very big difference to the lives of those people who may be suffering because of actions of others. Maybe it was something that you or I did. Of course, there's mercy between God and us, but there's also mercy between us and other people. And I think we need to keep that awareness that living our lives as ministers of mercy really does make a difference for the whole world. Wouldn't you agree, Mickey?
Yes, and actually, we are called to be ministers of mercy. Just as Jesus, he really laid the groundwork down for us. And we have to go out there and share that mercy to those in need. Trying to think of a quote. Forgive me here. There's a quote that C.S. Lewis reminds us that justice shall be mixed with mercy. Now, I kind of think of justice and mercy on a coin on the same, they're like the same sides of each coin. Because you see, we have to understand that, people need, we can't just judge people. We have to, help, we're called to help people. Because let's face it, no one's perfect at all. Gosh darn, I could agree with a lot of people on that one. But sometimes we have to understand that each person you encounter is Jesus. The homeless beggar, the convicted felon that's in prison and, God forbids, on death row, the mother in an unplanned pregnancy crisis who is unaware of life-saving alternatives, the volunteer worker or the escort outside the abortion facility who has no clue or knowledge about God at all. But you can minister his message to them. To that student who keeps slacking off in school, Jesus is in him too, or her. Those simple things. Every time you see Jesus, you will see an opportunity to extend his mercy.
Yeah, we can never forget that at the heart of mercy is Jesus himself. I mean, the Catholic faith does have a lot of doctrines, a whole, universal, I would call it, like almost like a big, huge universal, like library of saints and of teachings. But at the very heart of every single thing that we do is Christ and his teachings, right? And the Beatitudes really are one of his primary teachings in Holy Scripture. And so when we take that seriously and say, you know what, these were teachings of my Lord, the person that I love most in this world, we take it seriously enough to want to implement it every single day of our lives. And Saint Therese of Lisieux, one of the doctors of the church, she said, how happy I am to see myself imperfect and to have such need of God's mercy at the moment of my death. And if you think about it, she lived a life where she was challenged, living around the religious sisters that she was with all the time as a cloistered nun. And her virtues were for challenged, just in being a good listener, and being able to, put up with, I would almost use that word, with the vices of other people. And she became a person of a very good listening ear to other people. And I think that God wants us to do that when we exercise mercy in that particular way, when we can listen to other people's stories, let them have an opportunity to share. And we can then allow them to feel loved, right? Because part of mercy is also giving love to other people. And a great way that we can show love is just by being a friend to somebody. And maybe it's someone that you normally wouldn't be a friend with. But for you who are listening, our families in crisis, our individuals, we want you to know that that's who we are to you as this foundation. And just to remind you that you can talk to us, you can reach out and make your free appointment for a free pastoral consultation with a Mercedarian friar, the religious order that founded us. So just be sure to go to our website at nonnatus.org and connect with me as director, and I can set that up for you. I would really be happy to do that. Mickey, I didn't know, as we're heading toward the end, if you had anything else to say on mercy.
I do want to leave everyone with a quote from St. Augustine. Our sole hope, our sole confidence, our only assured promise is your mercy. And I believe that might have been from his work Confessions, and we mentioned this earlier in the podcast episode. But of course, St. Augustine, even though he was lost, he was found through the mercy of God. And he will find you as well. All you need to do is keep looking for him and listen to his voice that may be coming through others who want you to embrace his mercy now.
Thank you so much. You're right. Embrace his mercy now. And when this podcast is airing, we are still in the Lenten season. And this is a perfect time for all of us, you and me, Mickey, all of us, to grow closer to God. Now is the time. Receive God's mercy. And may I say, as we've talked about so much during this podcast, is that one way that you can receive that mercy is through the sacrament of reconciliation and confession. So I do highly recommend that to all of you, to giving you that healing and giving me the healing that we need with the Lord. But also take this time to do what we do during Lent: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. And that is also a way that you can exercise mercy toward other people and, of course, to yourself too. So, Mickey, thank you so much again. We're going to be back again next month. Appreciate you joining us, Mickey, as my co-host here.
Always a pleasure, Anne. And for those of you who are listening to this podcast, just to be assured that Anne and I will be praying for you. And we're here to help you.
Amen. Check out our website, as I always say, at nonnatus.org. All of our social media, St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation and Philly Nonnatus. Will be back next month, the last Thursday, for the Families in Crisis podcast series of the Beatitudes. God bless everyone. See you then.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, visit nonnatus.org or email director.srnf@gmail.com. Today, many students go to college with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed planted in them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. It is the perfect back-to-school gift for recent high school graduates and current college students. Get your copy for them today at patchworkheart.org or by calling 424-704-3278. That's 424-704-3278.
In the Gospels, Jesus asks his disciples an important question. Who do you say I am? Over 2,000 years later, this question continues to reverberate in the human heart. Some have only given this question a cursory thought. Others have spent years pondering the answer, searching the scriptures, and looking for evidence. This spring, Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry team with researchers and experts who have studied the Shroud of Turin to once again pose Christ's question to you. Who do you say I am?